concerned, aren't they?
Yes, that's correct.
And obviously the neighbouring authority raising that as an issue is extremely serious, isn't it, at this stage in the process?
It's definitely a very relevant issue that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah, it's not only a relevant issue, it's a very serious one, isn't it, because of the potential implications for the plan.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Right, well, that's all I want to ask you then about the emerging policy SP05. I can make submissions on that insofar as the weight is concerned. Can I now just ask you to take out, please, the Endeavour House decision letter, which Miss Shembry produces as Appendix 3 of her main proof of evidence, and so you'll find that in tab 9 of your file. Now, we had a little bit of a look at this yesterday afternoon, but I just wanted to go through it in a little bit more detail, if I may, please. And if we're, obviously I don't want to read it out but line by line, but you're familiar with this decision letter, it's obviously been produced in the evidence.
I'm familiar with it, yeah.
Thank you. So hopefully we can take this reasonably quickly. But this is an appeal, isn't it, that relates to a 4-storey office building, which essentially is in the airport development area of Stansted Airport, isn't it? And it relates to an office building that was originally permitted on the basis that it related to airport activities which would require office space. So it was essentially related airside development, in essence, wasn't it?
Yes.
And it was erected in 1998, and the appeal was made in 2011, 13 years after the building had been constructed. That's right, isn't it? And in that time, the second floor of that building had never been used, had it?
That's what's suggested.
Other than, I think, for a few months for public inquiry.
Yeah, sure.
But leaving that aside, it had never been occupied for best part of 13 years. And the building had had a vacancy level of 33%, hadn't it, since the time of its construction in 1998?
Yes.
And the appellants in that case sought a temporary variation of the condition which restricted the use of the building to airport-related activities. So they effectively sought a temporary period through which they could use the second floor for just general office use, didn't they?
Yes.
I think it was for a temporary period of 6 years. Paragraph 4, I think you'll find that. And if we look at paragraph 5, we can see that the point was put that in essence the vacancy of this floor for the best part of 13 years was an inefficient waste of high quality office space, wasn't it? That was one of the points that was put to the inspector, perhaps not unreasonably. And it was also suggested that the purpose of the restriction was not immediately apparent, given the background and the fact that the office had never been, or that part of the office had never been used for best part of 13 years. But the use of the building for anything other than airport use was contrary to the relevant policy of protection that pertains to Stansted Airport, which is similar to the EC4 policy, wasn't it?
Similar as principles, yes.
And in the light of that, if we look at paragraph 10 of the decision letter, the inspector said, if we look at the first sentence there, in contemplating a departure from policy S4 of the local plan, I acknowledge certain benefits from the proposal and little obvious immediate harm. And he then goes on to say it can be seen as a pragmatic response to a situation which could not reasonably have been foreseen at the time that policy S4, which is the policy of protection, was adopted, a time of economic optimism and expansion. So he could see that there was a pragmatic case for changing the use of the temporary period sort, didn't he?
Yes.
And he goes on at paragraph 11 to say that he accepts that a temporary permission would give the council full control over the future use of the interested parties, and approval in this case would be seen inevitably as setting a precedent for allowing temporary non-airport related use of any underused floor space within the airport. So clearly he was concerned about the precedent effect, or the thin end of the wedge concern, in respect of allowing even that temporary change of use, wasn't he?
He was.
And if we just look a little bit further down the paragraph, if we pick it up halfway down, he says, by accretion, a situation might develop where significant amounts of floor space were being used for activities having little or no relationship with the airport. And then he says that leads me to consider a wider concern expressed by interested parties that as a result of such development, the airport might over time tend to exhibit the characteristics of a business park, whose organic growth and developing impetus might leave the council increasingly less able to hold on to the concept of a self-sustained airport, self-contained rather, airport in the open countryside. So what he was concerned about, in part, was the fact that the change of use would undermine the integrity of an airport as an airport, wasn't he?
I fundamentally disagree with that. To me, the purpose of the policy is very different to the purpose of the policy of EC4. Here, if you go to the end of paragraph 12, the reference to any growth in airport-related activity might then result in demand for development outside the airport boundary. It then goes on to talk about the decision having been made to develop an international airport on prime agricultural land in an area characterised by small market towns and villages. The principles of sustainable development must discourage outward commercial uses from being attracted to this remote rural location unless they are justified in terms of the airport's operational needs. So to me, the key message from that decision is A, to protect the encroachment of built-up development into the open countryside, and B, to promote more sustainable patterns of development by discouraging employment uses to locations such a rural, isolated location, and alternatively to direct them elsewhere.
Clearly, he concluded that as well. I'm on a different point, and I'd be grateful if you could answer the question I put. The question I put was a different question, Mr. Alston. If I can just ask you to come back, please, to paragraph 12. He concerns himself with the dangers in granting a temporary permission for the subject floor space, and he explains why that is so in the middle of that paragraph, because he says by accretion a situation might develop where significant amounts of floor space were being used for activities having little or no relationship with the airport. And then he was concerned that the airport over time might exhibit the characteristics of a business park. Now, my understanding of that, and if you disagree, you'll have to explain why, but my understanding of that is that what he was concerned about in part was the need to protect the integrity of an airport as an airport and not allow it to be diluted, make other points, But that's the point he's concerned with there, isn't it?
I disagree. It's got no reference to the aviation functionality.
Well, forgive me. He's quite clearly saying there, isn't he? If we look at paragraph 12, an approval in this case would be seen inevitably as setting a precedent for allowing temporary non-airport related use of underused floor space within the airport. And he then goes on to say that it's going to change potentially from an airport to a business park. I mean, he's got the point firmly in mind, hasn't he?
I see no reference to this proposed development challenging the aviation functionality of that airport. The principles coming from this decision, as previously, in my view, as I previously set out, is about encroachment of built-up development into the countryside in terms of protection of countryside policies and sustainable patterns of development. And the context is that Stansted Airport was built in a rural location, and understandably, on sustainable development terms, it's not a preferred location for a business park.
But that rather proves my point, doesn't it? What he was concerned about, he was saying, well, this is an airport. What we don't want to do is we don't want to allow change of use to occur by diluting it into general office use, because it then goes from being an airport to a business park. And that's what he was concerned with, wasn't it?
No, he's concerned, in my opinion, he is concerned that if existing buildings are, if the change of use of existing buildings to non-airport uses are allowed, it may trigger a future need to build additional buildings associated with the airport, or indeed further business park related buildings in the future, because once the reservoir of existing airport buildings has been taken away, he's suggesting a future need could theoretically arise in the future, and it all comes down to openness of countryside policies.
So you read this decision as the inspector not being concerned at all about the policies of protection of the airport as an airport and concern over it effectively diluting into a business park. You think the decision letter shouldn't be read in that way? Is that your evidence?
Yes.
Can you help me with this? Paragraph 13, he says that the representations before me make clear that the communities surrounding Stansted Airport rely on the consistent application of policy S4 to prevent the airport becoming anything other than an airport. That's inconsistent with the answer you've just given me, isn't it?
No, I feel that it still comes down to the purpose of the policy, and the decision relates to the expansion of the built-up area into the countryside.
Mr. Olsen, what is your understanding of the meaning that the consistent application of the policy is there to prevent the airport becoming anything other than an airport?
Well, it is, as read, local communities surrounding the airport rely on the consistent application to prevent the airport become anything other than an airport.
And that's essentially to do with the point that I was putting to you, that the airport should not be diluted into a business park, isn't it?
No, I stand by my opinion that the principal message from this decision relates to expansion of business into the countryside and sustainable patterns of development.
Well, I've given you a couple of opportunities to answer the point. Shall we move on? Thank you. Availability of employment land. Paragraph 6.26. And we come back to the points that I said that we would come back to a moment ago, which is page 30. And you raise 4 points in those 4 paragraphs there, don't you, at the bottom, Roman 1 through to Roman 4. And the first one relates to the need for suitable employment floor space. That's one of the points you raise, isn't it?
Yes.
The second point is the generation of jobs, I think, is the next point you make. Is that right? And then the third and the fourth points you raise. The third point is site security, the need for site security, and the fourth point is Operation Stack. Operation Stack we've already dealt with, so we won't go back there because that's not a new point, is it? And insofar as concerns over site security and antisocial behaviour, you do not adduce any evidence to this inquiry that there has been a concern with site security or vandalism, do you?
That's correct, but it's a generally accepted principle that large, vacant, empty sites have a tendency to attract antisocial behaviour. So a fundamental planning principle is that if some use can be introduced to such sites, even on a temporary nature, it is helpful in order to maintain security on a formal level in the interim period prior to redevelopment. That's a generally accepted principle.
But you don't produce any evidence to support that assertion, do you?
No evidence submitted, but I'm sure the inspector would accept that is a generally held principle that wouldn't necessitate any specific evidence being submitted.
Well, we'll leave that there, I think. Right, can we move on then, please, insofar as the need for suitable accommodation is concerned? And can we just have a look at the specific buildings? Building 1, that's an aircraft hangar, isn't it?
That was its former use, yes.
Well, it's designed as an aircraft hangar, and it is, in essence, an aircraft hangar, isn't it?
It was designed for that purpose, yes.
And that's its lawful use, isn't it, at the moment?
Well, its lawful use forms part of an airport, so yes.
And it's the only aircraft hangar, I think, on the site, isn't it?
Yes.
And it's very large, isn't it? It's 5,544 square metres. And it's in poor condition, isn't it?
Yes.
And you have been promoting the change of use of this building, I think, since May 2015. But you, I don't think, have ever had a named occupier or occupiers for the building, have you?
Incorrect. There was a small company occupying part of the building, but they are no longer there. And I should add that when we were making reference to the quality of the building, it is secure and it is watertight, so it is ready for occupation.
Well, the inspector can go and have a look at the aircraft hangar on the site visit and how suitable it is for occupation. But insofar as its current, I mean, I think it is currently occupied, but it's in a very small part of it, but it's currently occupied, isn't it, by somebody who undertakes aviation-related work, namely repairs of engines and what have you.
My understanding is building 1 is currently not occupied. It has some low-level pieces of storage in there, but my understanding is that a company previously was occupying for that building, operating out of that building, but they are no longer there.
Well, that can be checked on site. Certainly when I went on site, there was a number of aeroplane seats that were being stored there. That was only last week. But Mr. Alston, do you have any named occupier or any written evidence that you can present to this inquiry to show that there is somebody who is happy to take up occupation of this poor quality aircraft hangar?
Not at present. The building hasn't been actively marketed due to the uncertainty associated with securing planning permission.
You don't present any evidence from an agent as to the potential occupiers that would be in the frame for moving into here, the sort of use that they would want to carry out here, or how much of the floor space they would want to take. There's no evidence like that at all in front of this inquiry, is there?
Not in respect to building 1, no.
And insofar as the poor quality nature of the building, which I think you've agreed, investment would be needed, would it not, in order to bring that up into modern standards?
Not necessarily. As I mentioned, the building is watertight and secure, and the company was previously operating from the building. Now, it would be up to an individual occupier to determine if they wish to invest in the building, and that will be linked to whatever their specific requirement might be for that building. So, for instance, one of the uses we were seeking approval for is B8, and that building is perfectly suited in its current state to be used for storage purposes.
So any individual occupier is going to be required to expend the money to bring it up to whatever standard they would wish it to be. Is that how it's going to work?
As I said, the building is of a suitable standard at the moment to be used today. Now, if someone wishes to invest the money for their own specific fit-out purposes, that will be their decision. Now, my understanding is, I'll backtrack a second, I don't have any understanding in terms of how the buildings would be managed, whether or not the current landowner might be inclined to invest in the building on a specific user's perspective, or whether or not it would be left for a future occupier.
So at the moment there's no evidence as to who would be making any necessary investment in order to make it appropriate for anything other than B8 use.
I didn't say it was only appropriate for B8 use. I used that as an example of an obvious use that could start tomorrow. It may well be suited for the full range of B1C, B2 and so uses that we sought consent for. In planning terms, it's perfectly suitable for the uses proposed in its current state. However, for instance, if it was going to become a B1C manufacturing unit, no doubt that occupier would want to invest into the contents of the units, obviously, and also perhaps some of the details of the building itself. But it is suitable for the uses for which approval has been sought.
But at the moment you don't have any potential occupiers for any of those uses?
That's correct, and that's understandable because we do not have plan permission for the proposed uses.
Forgive me, but the decision letter on this appeal will probably be out in about 6 or 8 weeks. It was perfectly open to you to call an agent to explain, well, I've got 10, 15 people all very, very keen to move into this property for a number of uses, but no such evidence is adduced by the appellant to make those points, is it?
No such evidence from an agent has been presented to this committee. Nonetheless, I will draw your attention to the comments made by the Thanet District Council Head of Economic Development and Regeneration, who has confirmed in some of the committee papers that there is a need for employment premises in the district.
We'll come on to that in a moment because, as I understand it, that committee report relates to Building 2. That's right, isn't it? But insofar as Building 1 is concerned, no takers that you put forward at this inquiry?
No takers because we haven't proactively sought any takers.
And can you just help me with this? I mean, how is the marketing literature going to work insofar as the proposed development consent order is concerned? Is it going to say, well, occupation potentially available until the end of December 2018? Or how is the marketing literature going to be pitched to prospective occupiers?
Well, Building 1 consent is sought on a temporary basis for 3 years, and that is how the those will be the details set out on the marketing literature. If a DCO application, and that is an if that is submitted, no doubt, as a responsible landlord, the landowner will make prospective tenants or occupiers aware that there is a prospective DCO/CPO proposition in the pipeline.
And again, we've got no evidence in front of this inquiry as to how that is likely to be received by potential occupiers, because we haven't got any potential occupiers, have we?
We have no potential occupiers to table today. That does not mean that there are no potential occupiers. We purposely, due to the unforeseen delays in securing planning permission, have not proactively advertised the opportunity, have not engaged agents to try and secure occupiers because we were unable to guarantee when the necessary planning permissions might come forward. and I believe that's a responsible approach to take as a landowner.
Well, that's a matter for the inspector to form a view on. Building 3, that's a cargo building, isn't it? Or was a cargo building, I think, until Mrs. Globe took all the related facilities out of it for storing cargo.
It's a shed that used to have a former purpose as part of the airport.
And it's 1,765 square metres, isn't it? It's quite substantial. It's in very poor quality, isn't it?
Say poor quality. Poor quality.
I mean, the only occupiers that were there when I went were the pigeons. It's really not a very pleasant environment to be in, is it? Because it's essentially full of pigeon droppings at the moment.
I acknowledge it could do with a bit of a clean. However, again, this is a watertight, secure building that is suitable for B8 uses. And Mr. Dunn, you'll see that tomorrow when you visit the site.
At the moment, no takers, and indeed no list of potential takers for this building.
We have, the landowner, I understand, has received proactive approaches from a theatre production company who's looking to use that building for the storage of staging and other paraphernalia associated with the theatre.
It's warehousing.
But they've had to turn that occupier away due to the lack of planning permission for that building.
Mr. Alston, you produce no written evidence whatsoever to support that, do you? As to the circumstances, what they wanted, when that was, there's no written evidence in front of this inquiry to support that at all, is there?
That's correct.
Building 4, that's a much smaller building, isn't it? And that's 390 square metres. It's, I think it's occupied currently by a generator supply, maintenance and repair operation, isn't it?
I believe that to be correct.
And in so far as the potential relocation of that business is concerned, there is no evidence produced by you to show that that business could not relocate to the Manston Business Park across the road, is there?
My understanding is that there aren't any vacant premises available in the Manston Business Park that could accommodate that business.
Again, Mr. Alston, you don't produce any evidence to support that assertion, do you?
No, I do not.
You haven't done any analysis at all of the units that are available at the Manston Business Park, of which there are many. That's right, is it?
I disagree. My understanding is that there are no available built units at Manston Business Park. And just in parallel to this process, further to discussions of yesterday, the intention is to draw up a schedule that you requested, which would be agreed by both parties in respect to each of those suggested alternative sites or premises, where we'll be able to ideally reach some common ground and agreement on whether or not buildings exist or do not exist, and whether or not there's any vacancies available.
Mr. Alston, have you spoken to the operators of Manston Business Park in order to support that evidence that you've just given to the inquiry?
I have not, nonetheless the landowner has, and they updated me on that matter this morning.
All right. Well, yes.
Just to clarify, Mr. Alston, you're saying that you don't think there's any availability at the business park?
That's what I was told this morning.
Oh, buildings.
Buildings.
Yeah.
What about when Cummins falls out?
And we are.
Sorry. Sorry, Mr. Alston.
We have had discussions with Ms. Shambry, and the intention is both parties were going to make those phone calls today, visit sites as necessary, and draw up a schedule set in respect to those alternative sites that were discussed yesterday to set out and agree with just the agreed facts.
That's right. I did ask for that to be done. I appreciate it. It's
yes, there seemed to be some uncertainty or disagreement about what the position was on those sites, so we agreed to go away and take further research.
Sorry, Mr. Alston.
So I'm just interested in this then, Mr. Alston. So your client has told you that there are that there are no vacant units at the Manston Business Park. Is that right?
That is what I've been told.
You haven't checked that yourself.
No, I have not. That's the process that's being undertaken in parallel today by both parties.
And who in your team told you that there were no vacant units at the Manston Business Park?
That is one of the representatives of the landowner, which is a gentleman called Paul Barber.
Right. Well, so my understanding is that there are numerous vacant units there, but that will need to be resolved as part and parcel of this schedule. Building 2. This again is a cargo handling building, isn't it? And Instro Precision, I think we're looking to consolidate its premises, and at one stage was interested in taking up this particular facility, wasn't it?
Yes, that's correct.
And they've now managed to find land and are going to build their new headquarters at Discovery Park, aren't they?
Yes, that's correct.
So they were able to meet their requirements within a purpose-built business park, weren't they?
Yes, they have.
And Discovery Park, I think, is about a 20-minute drive, isn't it, from the airport?
It's about that, yes.
And obviously there will be no lost jobs, will there, as a result of that organisation being able to go to Discovery Park?
I can't comment on that. I'm aware from a letter or a note prepared by the managing director of Instro Acquisition that the vast majority of their staff live within the district of Thanet. So there is going to be displacement of their jobs, even if it's only 15-20 minutes down the road. What effect that might have, other than unsustainable travel patterns, I couldn't comment on.
Well, forgive me, Mr. Alston, but firstly, you don't know where those individuals live within Thanet, and secondly, there is absolutely no reason whatsoever, is there, why if somebody has got a job and they might have to drive another 15 minutes or so, they're not going to be able to retain that job. That's fair, isn't it?
It's not conclusive, and
Mr. Elson, I'm not even going to come back on that. The inspector has heard your answer. I'm going to move on now. Now, the point that you were happy to, or that you wanted to draw attention to, was the comments of the head of the economic development at Thanet. And can I ask you, and the committee report, can I ask you to take out CD 8.3, please? Do you have that? It's the consultation response from the head of economic development and regeneration. Do you have that there? It's on page 13 of the document. It's a very difficult document to navigate your way around, because I think there are some numerous pages in here which are unrelated, but I think hopefully the inspector's got a... This is the 21st of October 2015 special report. Oh, sorry. CD... Beg your pardon, sorry, Mary, I beg your pardon, it's CD 8.5. Let's go to CD 8.5 because I think that's the last report in the series, isn't it? So that's the last final report. It is, yes, you're absolutely right, yes. Yes, thank you, yes, it does. And hopefully the inspector can find that. And it's the comment from the Head of Economic Development and Regeneration that I think you draw attention to, isn't it, Mr. Alston? That's right. Do you have it, sir?
Yes, I do. I don't know if it's a comment the same or...
I think it is. Yeah, I haven't seen any changes because I think it was a consultation response that was given at the start of the process, which I don't think was revisited during the iterations of the various reports.
So this is under the heading consultation?
That's correct, sir. Yes, do you have that?
I do.
Thank you. And Mr. Alston, if we can then have a look at this, we can see it says Head of Economic Development and Regeneration. And this, of course, we need to remember is in connection with Building 2, isn't it? It's not the other three, it's Building 2. It says aware of business intention to relocate. So that was Instro Precision, wasn't it? Stating the arrangement of the existing units is not supporting their business and the units becoming increasingly obsolete and unfit for purpose. And that was their, I think, where their current operation is being undertaken. And then it goes on to say, generally, still limited demand for larger units, which require significant capital investment and are usually built out by developer only when agreement is in place for the occupier to lease purchase the completed scheme. So, I mean, I take from that, Mr. Alston, that what the Head of Economic Development and Regeneration was saying is that there's limited demand for larger units, and that's right, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree with that. Limited, but not nil. And I can add that since Instro Precision fell away and secured alternative premises over in the adjacent districts in Sandwich, I'm told that 2 other firms have proactively expressed an interest in occupying the building. This includes a waste management company looking for a base for its vehicles and a company that prepares ready meals. Again, they've been turned away due to the planning position of those buildings.
Mr. Wilson, I think that's, that evidence has been given, I think, for the first time, hasn't it, just now? And you don't produce any written evidence to explain what the nature of these businesses are, when they would want to go into occupation, or what they want to use the business, the buildings for, do you?
That's correct.
Or whether they were aware that the land is going to be the subject of a promoted DCO, where they might have to give up their occupation at the end of December 2018.
That's correct, Leo. Just to reiterate my previous point, we don't have certainty that an application for DCO is going to be submitted.
No, but prospective purchasers would have to be, or leaseholders would have to be told that that is what is currently planned, wouldn't they, as we've agreed?
Yes, I think that's absolutely reasonable, and any fair, responsible landowner or landlord would do that.
And you then come on at page 37 of your evidence. Coming back, please. Actually, I've covered that point. No, I won't take any more time up with that. Thank you. I think we've already dealt with that. The next point I'd like your help with is Miss Shembry's rebuttal evidence, her Appendix 1 and 2, and if you can take that out, please. And I know you're going to be producing your schedule, Mr. Alston, with Miss Shembry, but if we just take, yes, of course, yes, of course. And if we look at Appendix 1 and Appendix 2,
Yes.
you and I can agree, I hope, that there is a significant amount of employment land available for employment uses, isn't there?
I believe it's common ground between us that there is extensive employment land available in the district.
So much so that I think, as I understand it through the emerging local plan, that 30 hectares of employment land are going to be put over to housing because it's regarded as not being needed. That's right, isn't it?
I believe that's the case, yes.
And the reason I would suggest that there is employment land rather than employment premises, Mr. Alston, is because there's no demand to change it from land into premises, hence the conversion of 30 hectares to residential in the local plan.
It's either going to be a lack of demand points or a market failure point, in that buildings for which there is demand or need aren't being provided due to failures in the market, whether that be viability or otherwise. Now, based on the information that's been provided to us by the Council's Head of Economic Development and Regeneration, there is a lack of supply of industrial type buildings which are larger. The majority of buildings that have been built recently tend to be of a smaller nature, is my understanding.
I would suggest to you that the reason that buildings have been erected recently is in order to meet the demand that actually exists, and that's why smaller units have been created, because if larger units were required, they also would have been created. I mean, that's fair, isn't it?
I believe that's fair.
And then paragraph 6.44 of your evidence, please. Page 37. Just to finish this point off, at paragraph 6.44, you make the point that in Little Roman 3, that much of the existing employment accommodation is of poor quality, which is likely to restrict demand, particularly from inward investors. But you and I can agree, can we not, because it's your evidence, that 3 out of these 4 buildings are in poor condition, aren't they?
Yes, we can agree with that.
And then the last point I'd like your help with is this, please. Can we go back to the report to committee in relation to these, the buildings 1, 3 and 4 in February 2016, and you'll find that in CD 9.1. And can I ask you please to turn in that document to page 13, and this is the report. If we just actually, perhaps to start with, we took up page 11 just to orientate ourselves. This relates, this report is a result of an appeal which has been submitted, so it's in connection with the appeal against non-determination of buildings 1, 3 and 4, isn't it? Yeah, and it's 4.2 I'm interested in. You were obviously instructed by this time, weren't you? Because this is February 2016, and you tell us in your evidence that you were instructed in 2015. That's right, isn't it? And if we look at paragraph 4.2, we can see it's dealing with the 3 planning applications, and then if we pick it up at the second sentence, it says these applications were not reported to members within the statutory time period, as officers were awaiting further justification to understand the particular need to reuse these buildings for the specific operators. Because obviously building 2 was taken to committee because there was a specific occupier with a specific need. So officers, as I understand it, had sought additional information as to what the specific operators were that were going to go into occupation of these buildings, and I'm right in saying, am I not, that that information was never provided to the council?
Mike?
A letter was submitted in respect to Building 1, dated 17th of July 2015 from X-Wind, regarding their aspirations for the site, that's CD 1.3. A letter was provided from Powermain Limited on 20th of July 15 in respect to Building 4, that's CD 4.3, and CD 2.4 is a statement from Instro Precision in respect to Building 2. So I'm not too sure. I would think that these dates do tally. This meeting, 17th Feb 16. Yes, so I believe those letters that are in your core documents address that point. Sorry.
Well, Mr. Alston, they couldn't have addressed your point, could they? Because, I mean, this report was in February 2016, and there was no suggestion that any subsequent information had been provided at the time this report was written. Can I just have your help, though? Just coming back to those letters that you referred to, the 17th of July 2015, CD 1.3. Which building did you say that was? That's Building 1. 17, the other one, CD 4.3, that was Building... Right, they're already in, they are the current occupiers of the building. Building 1, they've gone, you're telling us? The occupiers then, they've gone.
That's correct.
And there was one other document that you referred to I didn't quite catch.
CD 2.4, which relates to Building 2.
So that would have been Instro provision, wasn't it? And they've gone as well, haven't they?
Applications were submitted on 23rd of May 15. Paragraph 4.2 basically gives the reason why these applications were not determined within the statutory timescales, 8 or 13 weeks, whichever one applied to these applications. Now, looking at the dates, 17th of July, 17th of July, 20th of July, it seems that these letters were submitted around the sort of 10-week mark. So I don't think we need to debate it massively, but I think that's the sequence of events, and that's what the paragraph is referring to.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much. So I just come back then, insofar as the document that was submitted on the 17th of July and relating to Building 1 is concerned, those occupiers are no longer there. They've gone. Building 4 occupiers are still there, and insofar as Building 2 is concerned, the CD 2.4, that was Instro provision, who've now gone to Discovery Park. Okay, thank you very much. That's all I want to ask you about employment land provision. And I just want to now just finally deal with the issue of whether the proposals would compromise future use of the airport. And if I can ask you please to turn to page 32 of your evidence, paragraph 6.30. Yeah, sorry, 6.31. Sorry, I beg your pardon, I've given you the wrong reference. 6.31. You say that if successful compulsory acquisition of the airport site would enable vacant possession of the whole site to be secured. And the use of your language there is quite careful, I'm sure, Mr. Alston, because all that the compulsory purchase order does is that it enables the acquisition of the land to be secured. And inevitably, there is a time period over which it was necessary for those that are the beneficiaries of the CPO effectively to ensure that they end up with a vacant site by clearing occupiers from it. And that's the way it works, isn't it? And can you and I agree that the purpose that the government introduced the Planning Act and the development, the DCO process was essentially to ensure the fast tracking of proposals which are considered to be nationally significant in order to quicken up the process and to provide certainty? That was the whole purpose of that introduction of that process, wasn't it?
Yes, it's all about efficiency.
And certainty as well, isn't it?
Yep, I can agree with that.
And insofar as the confirmation of a DCO does not provide a vacant site, it inevitably, doesn't it, introduces a question mark, firstly over the timing as to when one is actually going to secure vacant possession, doesn't it?
It does.
And over the certainty as to when one will in fact be able to secure vacant possession.
It does. What it does is it ensures that the powers to ensure vacant possession are incorporated as part of that development consent.
Yes, we don't dispute that. But insofar as the buildings that you are looking to obtain a change of use for, and which you're saying are going to be occupied, that's the aircraft hangar, the two warehouse buildings, and essentially an equine quarantine building, which are going to be needed, as you've heard from Ms Shembry, at least in the first instance, for storage, if nothing else, in terms of progressing the reuse of the airport. And that won't be able to be done until those occupiers have gone, will it?
I dispute the use of the word needed. I anticipate there are reasonable alternatives to having the need to use these buildings. As we've already discussed, these are very basic buildings, watertight, weathertight and securable. Nonetheless, I cannot see how these are essential buildings in order to bring forward a future airport use on this site.
So if those buildings are being occupied by other individuals and are not available for use, where else on the airport site are you saying that the facilities and the construction and all that sort of thing can be stored? Where else is there?
There's 300 hectares of land upon which alternative buildings can be erected.
So we're into alternative buildings then, right, thank you. And as I understand it, in the conditions that you are seeking to impose on these, certainly I think it's building 1 and building 4, no, sorry, I beg your pardon, it's building 1 and building 3, you're seeking the ability to subdivide those premises down to units of about 350 square metres, is that right? That's what your clients are seeking.
Are we referring to the conditions set out in the Statement of Common Ground, just to clarify? Okay. That is a condition that's been requested by the local authority to prevent the landowner from subdividing the buildings into smaller units. It is not a condition that the landowner does not intend to subdivide the buildings. The local authority has requested a condition to prevent us from doing so into very small units. So we are happy to accept a condition that says no subdivision, effectively. But I would think that would be a discussion for when we debate conditions later on in this process.
that discussion then. Thank you very much. And as I understand it, you don't dispute the evidence put in by Ms. Shombry that certainly for the first 10 years of the River Oaks proposals, all these 4 buildings are needed for aviation use until the following phases of the airport can't come into being. You don't dispute that, do you?
Yes, I do dispute that. The word need is something that I can't accept in the context that there would be reasonable alternatives to reusing these buildings in association with an aviation use. Also, that's in the context that vacant possession will be achieved for all of these buildings in the appropriate timescale after which the DCO is granted. But I think it's a safe assumption to make that vacant possession would certainly be achieved within the first 2 years, during which my understanding River Oak intend to spend preparing the site to reopen as an airport after a 2-year period. So what we're talking about is a potential feasible alternative for the first couple of years.
This is back into the new buildings on the remainder of the site point, is it? Yes, right, thank you. But can you and I agree that in looking to relocate occupiers from the airport land, that one of the factors that will need to be taken into account is the personal circumstances of those individuals and the ability for them to be relocated and the timeframes within which that will be achievable?
Yes.
And of course, all those matters are avoided, aren't they, if policy EC4 is applied?
Yes, that would be the case, but equally all the benefits of allowing the appeals to proceed would also be avoided.
Well, we've already been through those. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Alston.